here last time is we said once we've got our act together and processed all this information, put some thought into it, we would come back at the next meeting, which is this workshop, and share some concrete ideas which we are ready to do tonight. So I appreciate your patience on all that. And at one point we'll probably ask you, and probably 60% of you have done it already, we'll ask you to do a survey on some citywide things, and we'll see how that goes. So with that in mind, I'm going to turn this over to Eliza, who runs the ship here most of the time.
Good evening, everybody. I'm going to start out the evening talking about some citywide issues, and if you were here last night or Monday night, actually if you were here Monday night, it's going to be exactly the same presentation. If you were here last night, it's going to be an abbreviated version of what you heard last night. And then we're going to focus on Holiday Isle specific issues. During the citywide issues, we're going to get some feedback from you using some surveys, and that's why you have a folder in front of you. It doesn't have anything in it. It's just so when you get the survey, you'll have something a little bit hard to write on. And then after we talk about the Holiday Isle specific issues, we'll gather up at the chairs, the circle chairs in the back, to have a discussion about that. So these are our study areas. If you want to take a closer look at this, Lynn in the back should have handouts with this detail on it. But tonight we'll be talking about Holiday Isle and just briefly talking about Harbor CRA and Town Center a little bit. So I'm going to summarize very, very briefly the presentations that we gave, which were much lengthier about some of the background information when we were here back in May. We talked about the regional assets of Destin, some of those assets that it shares with its neighbors, including proximity to at least 3 airports, and then a 4th that's an executive airport. Its position on US 98, which is a significant corridor within this district. It's also, which gives a lot of opportunity and exposure to other folks who are traveling, but it also, of course, then you're subject to their travel traffic as well. Another thing that you share with your regional neighbors is the beautiful Gulf of Mexico and the white sand beaches. When you getting into Destin specifically and what Destin's assets are, of course we heard from the community pride in the fishing fleet, and that charter fishing and charter boats continue to this date in the harbor, and that harbor itself is an asset, as well as the harbor boardwalk. And the great thing about the harbor boardwalk is it actually came out of a previous visioning effort, very much like this one. We also talked about some of the citywide challenges. In particular, we noted that the permanent population was much, much smaller than the temporary population or the visitor population that you accommodate every year. And we heard from you that that creates a lot of problems. It creates a feast or famine for businesses that are trying to survive. In winter, they have trouble filling up, and in summer, they can't accommodate everyone. And it also, of course, you have to deal with big city problems with a small population of 12,000 people. When it comes to workers, the vast majority of people who work in the city of Destin don't live here. It's over almost 80%. And in addition, those workers are by and large in tourist or tourist-related industries, which is great, of course, as an income stream, but also if you want to stay in town and do something other than that industry, there aren't too many options. We also talked about US 98, both from how it looks and how that impacts the brand of Destin, as well as from a safety standpoint. There were nearly 800 crashes on 98 in a 6-year period, according to an FDOT study. A third of those were pedestrian and bicycle crashes, which is disproportionately large for the number of bicycles and pedestrians that you see out there relative to relative to cars, of course, and the number of crashes for cars is also far too high. And we also talked about regional competitors. The landscape, the regional competitive landscape on the Panhandle has changed a lot in the last 30 years. In the last few years, places like Pensacola have really upped their game in their downtown, trying to make it a walkable place that people want to come and hang out. And in addition, the South Walton County has really grown, and the communities there that didn't exist 30 years ago have now become a real force in the marketplace. In addition, we also talked about, and this came up last night, there's some things like Destin Commons, which have the Sand Destin, that have the Destin name on them, but are not actually within the city limits of Destin, and therefore Destin doesn't get the economic benefit of that. So we're going to talk to you about some of the feedback you gave us last time, and Brian's going to kick that off by talking about the Community Values Survey.
And I know a lot of you have seen this before, but for those of you that haven't, we will do it again. So, we told you when we were here last that this survey, and you were really very cooperative and diligent in helping us get this done because it was a lot of work. Actually ended up voting on 131 different pictures, and when we put it all together, by the way, 244 of you voted. And when you multiply those two numbers, you get the number of bits of information we got that was very valuable to us was nearly 32,000 pieces of information, this type of information. So that guided us in a lot of things. So just to explain how that worked, of that 131 images we showed you, each one had a number. So the number on the far right in yellow just was the number for that slide. And you had a line on a piece of paper, and you could track which image you had to vote on. There were 6 categories. This shows one of them, which was landscape architecture and open space. This slide happened to get a very high rating. It came in number 3, and that's what that number is. And then the rating, when we took all of those together and averaged them out, came to plus 3.5. So if it's green, it was a plus. And you'll see some that are with a number that are red, and that was a minus. So the way the plus minus thing worked is we said, we want you to look at one of these images, and everybody had about 5 seconds, by the way. So you couldn't think about it, you just had a gut reaction. So look at that image, and if you think it's appropriate, you might like it or not, but if you think it's appropriate for the city going forward sort of the next 20 years, so it's not just tomorrow, then you would vote it from all the way from 0 to plus 5. And if you thought it was very inappropriate going forward, you didn't want to see it any time in the next 20 years, you go 0 to minus 5. And we collected all those numbers and averaged them out, and then that becomes this little number here. So, just diving right into it, one of the categories was signage. Happened to be one that got a lot of attention. So this was the worst graded slide, obviously not a big surprise. Number 1 bad, and was a minus 4.37. The minus 4.37 is kind of an interesting number, because if you can imagine trying to get 244 people together to all agree on something, which would have been a complete minus 5, it's almost impossible, right? So some people went maybe minus 3, but most of you went minus 5. We averaged it out, it got to minus 4.37. So remember the number, because when you see other numbers, you can relate it back to that bad number, which I call a bad number. This didn't do a whole lot better. It's still a minus 4. Same thing here, just about a minus 4, minus 3.53, all in the category of signage. Sometimes it's big and bad, and sometimes it's just unorganized or too many or whatever. You knew it though. You knew exactly when you saw those signs. You didn't really want to see more of that for the next 20 years. So then on the plus side, this gets a huge vote. Well, it's not a surprise, but you should sort of think, well, why would it get a nice vote? Well, it's organized, it's not as overwhelming, it's well maintained, and it's natural. You guys like that. This one, is still positive, but not so much, and you can tell the difference. We've got a different category, which is landscape architecture and open space of all things. And we showed this image because there's landscape there, and it's about as bad as it gets, minus 4.33. And all these other things play into it, the cramped sidewalk, the overhead power, the lack of maintenance. I'm sure you're registering all that because you had 5 seconds, you didn't have to think about it. So this is also very negative and doesn't have the same characteristic, but it comes out negative. This one, again, it's got a little more space, a little more green, but it's very poorly maintained. There's no pride in this piece of property, and you tell us that when you voted and you went negative on it. And of course, this is on the same street, so this is something that gives you hope and some inspiration, because that one is on the same road and it got a huge plus. There's 100 in the community, I think, for this type of space, which is natural, open space. There is some of this still left. And you can walk and bike through there and just enjoy nature. This is a more urban open space. It's a town park. It happens to be what town I come from. Someone asked me the other night, by the way, are these all Destin slides? And some of them are and some of them aren't. If we couldn't find a really good one, then we drew on some other experiences we've had. This one's in Winter Park. It's a nice urban park in the downtown. There's a community event going on there. There's a sidewalk that people are comfortable riding and walking on, and benches and so on. So you gave it a good score. Again, this is all about community, where local people can enjoy things and do things together. And this one is important to us because it showed us that you gave a high score to preserving some of the native heritage ridge landscaping, which can be brought back. So that inspires us to do that. And then in residential, this one did not score well, -3. But remember, the worst thing was a -4.37. So although you don't like this one, it's a whole lot less than the one that represents that road. This one didn't do a whole lot better. And this one's interesting to us because this one, we tested an idea here, which is it's a pretty nice street. It's 2 lanes, got parallel parking, there's a lot of pedestrian activity, and it's got about a 22 or 23-story building and comes out real negative, so that tells you something. This one didn't do a lot better, and this one didn't either. And then this goes positive, so there's a lot of sympathy for this type of environment, which of course I think is represented north to the east of you guys. So there may be opportunities for more of this, and some nice houses and some smaller ones. And what we liked about these slides, which all came in positive, is it shows there's support for a lot of different types of housing. And we know that that's important in any community because people have a lot of different needs. For example, in America today, the population, 50% of the population is single. So there's a lot of single people who still want to be in a single family house or a small house, and they want to downsize, or they're just starting out their life. And so we want to have a lot of opportunities with different types of housing. And that's represented in some of these images. So it doesn't all have to be one size fits all, it can be quite diverse. And then we asked you to look at highway commercial. And this is an older building and it didn't score very well. And nor did that, or that. And this one didn't either. And this one definitely shows big parking lots as the front door, or the image that you get as you drive down that highway is not that desirable. As opposed to this, which gets a better score, so it's a nice building, it's pulled up closer, there's a little bit of parking in front, and some newly installed landscaping, and obviously the implication is going to be well maintained, and like this one. So this is got a very high score, it's an existing building. So did this, and these are not vastly positive, but you like them, and we like that. And way roadways, it went down to -2.9, a lot of power lines, and again, big, nice restaurant maybe, but big parking lot in front of it, and very narrow sidewalk and lots of power lines. And maybe a building that could have been done a little better. And you like this kind of environment where it's organized, it's shady, there's care and feeding of the environment, and people feel comfortable in there. This is about a high rating. It's a European street, which may not happen here, but it showed sort of that the comfort factor of an intimate street that's very pedestrian and bike friendly gets a high score on your part. And this was done well. And this one's interesting in the sense there's a big road on the left, multi-lane, and there's a nice little landscape barrier, and then there's some cars parked, and people feel safe walking and biking on the right side because it's a safe, slow vehicle environment. And this one, got a good score for a continuous recreation trail, could be a little wider. And obviously concerned for safe crossings for families, and we believe that too. Okay. Oh, I'm still in this, Eliza reminds me. So this is another category. We said, tell us what you think of the town center. And again, a nice street, some nice buildings, but a really big building comes out negative. We think it's the big building. You'll decide for yourselves, and we suspect that's why it gets a big negative. This one didn't do that great, but they're not as bad as some of those really tall buildings. Or the little ones didn't do so well. Not sure why. They're kind of cute. I kind of like them myself. But then we go really positive when you see a community space You see community activities for all ages. There's some little bit of a performance going on in the backyard there, and it's a celebration, maybe it's 4th of July or something. And you hunger for that, I think, in the community. We resonate with that idea, and places calmly sit down and have some coffee with your friends. Streets that are elegant and simple, but well landscaped and have interesting buildings. And places where you can bike safely. Places where you can close down the street and have a festival, maybe an art show or something. And your own open air retail, mixed-use center, nice architecture, farmers market once in a while, every week probably, and a mix of buildings that are interesting and comfortable for people. And that's our hometown, where it's a very pedestrian-friendly shopping street, and of course bikes and this ability to use bikes safely would be a big plus. And some quiet, dignified places that are, well-maintained, well-designed, gets a high score. And finally, this one, shows a little more intensity, and there's some workplace opportunities, some offices, some people living, and other supporting uses. Thank you.
Very, very quickly, we had pages and pages of public comments up on the wall if you were here last time, and we poured over all of those, but I'm just going to go through the highlights tonight with you, especially since some of you were there. So in terms of assets that you identified in the community, they were nature, all of the natural assets, particularly the water, of course, and the active recreation afforded by that, the harbor and the harbor boardwalk, the fishing fleet, which we've discussed already, the small town feel, and family-oriented tourism. In terms of challenges, you talked about traffic, road safety for both bikes, pedestrians, and cars. You talked about code enforcement issues, development impacts. You talked about tourism impacts, and in particular the idea that whereas this used to be viewed as a family-friendly destination, that the sense is it's moving to be more of a party destination. You talked about the outmigration of permanent residents, that the sense of a stable, permanent community here for year-round residents was something that was being lost or that wasn't very strong. You also talked about a lack of a positive identity and brand. You talked about some other issues, such as the worries about pollution in the harbor, and some things that were outside of our scope. That's probably one of them. You also talked about opportunities, the idea that transit currently isn't very functional, but that in the future it might be, needed to be expanded and improved. You talked about, not in so many words, but what we call missing middle housing, and that's kind of what Brian was getting at, about having housing for different life stages and different lifestyles. You talked about the need for, especially given the safety concerns, for safe biking and walking options, and you also talked about, to some extent, folks who wanted to see a high school. So I'm going to give you a very, very brief summary of our citywide recommendations, and we've drilled into each area and how it affects each area over the course of this week. Tonight, of course, we'll be drilling into how that affects Holiday Isle. So we're recommending citywide within the areas that we're looking at, because we're not responsible for the whole city, but in the areas we're looking at, we're recommending eliminating the tier system, and that means different things in different areas. We're recommending taking the design guidelines. There are design guidelines that exist both in the comprehensive plan, which is the main thing that we're talking about revising right now, and in the land development code. And we're talking about the need to combine those and consolidate them and move them into land development code, which is really where, from a professional planning standpoint, more detailed kinds of recommendations belong. We're also talking about making those design guidelines a little bit more robust. And because in some cases those design guidelines today only apply to buildings that are in tier 2 or tier 3, we're talking about making them universally applicable, which means that they would apply to all buildings. Some of the recommendations we're going to make for the design guidelines regard proportion and scale. And we're also talking about the need for detailed design guidelines for landscape signage and architecture that are not something that we can do as part of this project, but we're recommending the need for those. The next thing that's kind of a major recommendation is this idea of total FAR, which we think can increase predictability for development within the city. And I'll very briefly describe what FAR is for those of you who aren't familiar with that term. It means floor area ratio. And basically what that means, for every square foot of land that someone owns, that they can build, if it's a 1 FAR, they can build 1 square foot of building. Now they can distribute that building over the site in different ways, so all 3 of these would be a 1 FAR, because this one's only taking up half the site, it's 2 stories, and because they're actually required to have certain setbacks and certain other limitations, you actually would never build this condition because you wouldn't have a functional project. So if you ever see a 1-story building, it's not a 1 FAR, it's a 0.5 FAR or a 0.25 FAR. So the concept of total FAR, what we mean by that is today in the city, FAR is used to describe primarily commercial development and also to some extent parking garages. What we're recommending is using FAR to describe the entire building, to give you a sense, because right now FAR, say if you're in mixed-use development, only gives you a sense of how part of the building looks. And if you're in a residential development, you know what the units per acre is, but that doesn't tell you anything about how large the building might be. And we're actually going to get into that a little more detail later in the Holiday Isle presentation. So what we're recommending is not taking the existing FARs that are for non-residential and just applying them to everything, but to develop a new FAR that would make sense for all 3 of those uses: parking, non-residential, and residential uses. We're also talking about, in general, requiring pedestrian-friendly design. There's already things throughout the code that talk about pedestrian-friendly design, but we're just talking about enhancing those a little bit. And that can be as simple as making sure that you have a walkway connecting the public sidewalk to your front door, or if it's a larger project, it could be a more robust pedestrian connective system. So that's kind of the technical detail. Now we're going to shift gears and talk about 2 big ideas that we think address some of the concerns that came out of the public discussion when we were here in May. Those two issues that Brian's going to talk about are restoring the Destin brand, and as we said, we think the Destin brand is really heavily influenced by what you see coming in on US 98. And so Brian's going to talk about a big idea for retrofitting US 98. And the other thing that he's going to talk about is the town center. We talked about this issue of the lack of a permanent resident population that's stable and robust, and the lack of job diversity. And we think the best place in the city to address those issues would be in the town center. So I'm going to hand it over to Brian.
There's 2 ways to look at 98. And I know you've looked at all those images, so you definitely know what the problem is. No mystery there. There's the opportunity for what we call a big fix, which would be to actually comprehensively deal with 1.65 miles, which I think goes from Main Street down to the harbor. Am I right? And we'll show you how that might work. And then Eliza will come back a little later. Actually, not in this presentation. We did it last night because it really was, last night was more detailed. We're doing the harbor area, so it's not really something we're going to do tonight. But what I want to say about it is we do have some short-term fixes. If this big idea didn't work, of how new development might happen on both sides of 98 would at least be considered to be an improvement on that particular property. The problem with that is that it will piece by piece by piece, and hooking it all together would be probably very time-consuming and may take a long, long time. But this idea is something that can happen soon. There's actually a window of opportunity in this because the Florida Department of Transportation has money allocated for this particular road, and they're getting ready to resurface it. And once they do that, and the money they have, by the way, doesn't do this total fix. But once they do that, they're probably not going to come back and do anything for a good period of time, might be 10 years or so. So we think there's a window. They seem to be receptive to talking with us about this, and we're excited about that. At some point, we'll actually hand out a little form for you, and some of you did it already, and it's probably okay to do it again, I guess. And how you feel about that, but double counting's okay, maybe. I don't know how to deal with that question, but we will ask you. We'll take a few questions while we're handing it out, because there's always questions about this because it's complicated. We can't to answer all the questions, and no detailed engineering's been done on this, but we do have a big idea that has been worked out to where we think it can be validated with you. So let's talk about that road. This is sort of an engineering type cross section, what that road really looks like if you cut a cross section through it. And what's important is it's within 100 feet that is owned by the DOT or regulated by the DOT. So that's public property. And the way and you use it every day so you know how it works. But in the middle, there's a 33-foot area where all these left turns occur and some landscaping. And this is, say, for this discussion, we'll be talking about the south side. And pretend you're looking west, this would be the south side. So let's just talk about the road. So it's 4-lane divided, it's got this 33-foot median. It is high vehicular operating speeds in off-peak. In full peak, it's real slow, you guys know that. But otherwise, they're going as fast as they can go. It's very poor from a pedestrian point of view, very terrible sidewalks, inadequate crossings, a lot of people being hurt, you heard from Eliza. From a bike point of view, forget about it, you'd never think of it. There are many full access median openings that are very frequent. They don't meet DOT standards, and at some point the DOT might come back and push back on that, because when there are enough fatalities, which happen every year, at some point they have an obligation to reduce those, which is not a good thing. So that's sort of something that could happen at some point, because their criteria is usually 660 feet between those. It does have heavy through traffic, which is not your traffic. There's a lot of regional traffic going through there. It's not lit very well, and mostly it's got these very bad power lines that are very ugly and definitely don't enhance the brand. So that's what we've got. What we're suggesting, and by the way, you validated the negative aspects of this, whether it was on the landscape, the signage, or the actual roadway, those are all your big negative scores. So the idea we've come up with is to try to work within that right-of-way. Because if you can imagine trying to do something for 1.65 miles, where you had to go in and buy property from everybody to widen it, would probably be almost impossible to do, very, very expensive. So we said, let's look at trying to minimize the changes that have to happen within the 100 feet. And also let's try to save the cost. So rather than trying to rebuild both sides of the road at the same time, which would literally almost double the cost, let's try to save this part of the drainage and the infrastructure and all the buried pipes and everything on this north side, and let's work on this side. So what we did here is we reduced the median from 33 feet to 10 feet, and we took 1 foot off each of those lanes. People got confused last time when I said reduce the lane size. You just take 1 foot off, so the lanes get to be 11 feet, which by the way calms traffic and slows it down, but it does a good thing. And then we rebuild this side of the road. We have a continuous landscape median now that's 10 feet wide. And then we rebuild this side of the road and we recover 32 feet where we can do something really magical. And what is that? It's this continuous multimodal trail, 12 foot wide with landscape on both sides and these canopy trees that you like so much to be reintroduced. And the best part of all is we can take the power lines that serve both sides of the road and bury them over here. And that's very important, because if we had to go and try and put those power lines underground somewhere else, that would be the same problem as trying to widen the road. It'd be very, very difficult and very torturous thing to do. So a lot of things come together with this concept. And of course it has roundabouts, maybe 6 of them in that 1.6 miles that I talked about. So that's basically just showing you what I verbally described about how we're working on that one side of the road. And to make it easy to sort of imagine what this looks like, that's the way it is today at one particular place that we picked. And once we do this, we recover this 32 feet right here, all in the public right-of-way. And that's where the 12-foot lane multimodal trail comes in. And we get these landscape strips that we can reforest with that native ridge landscaping that you like so much. And there's a building on this side that hasn't changed yet. But as things mature a little bit, it's an incentive for investment to come in and start to spend some real money. And so you get a new building happening here. And as it matures and grows, much more vitality starts to be possible, and investment is attractive, in our opinion, to go ahead and do something, because now we've really changed the whole environment out there. So, is this what we want to do, a little voting check? No, okay. Well, all of those ideas are captured on this one slide. And so we were thinking it would be a good idea to sort of capture those ideas. These are the positive design features: construction within the existing right-of-way, travel lanes that are slightly reduced by 1 foot, bury the existing power lines, signalize mid-block crossings for pedestrians, and this is a little diagram of where that might happen, and this is the cross-section I talked about, and this is the overall effect that we could end up with.
So right now, Lynn and Monica and maybe some other folks are going to start handing out surveys, and while they're doing that, if we have any questions we can answer about this, we'd be happy to do that. Like Brian said, we're just going to be able to take a few questions, and we don't have all the answers yet, and we don't claim to. But the first question on that survey we'd like you to answer now. The rest of the questions, don't look at quite yet. We'll get to those.
So the question, you can read it for yourself, but the idea of the question is that we know that all the details aren't worked out, but we want to get a direction. So the direction is, should this be pursued? Is this a good idea or not? Yeah. Quite a simple question.
Should we take it to the next level?
What's the required diameter for a roundabout with that lane situation?
Yeah, I'm thinking, and I don't know, by the way. Some of the guys in my office do know. I want to say maybe it's a radius of 90.
A radius of 90?
Yeah, I think to the outside.
Radius, not diameter.
Well, what do you think?
Let's not answer that tonight, because we don't want to get it wrong.
I might get in more trouble than I deserve, Steve. I think I'll pass on this.
We've looked at it, and we think it's possible enough, but it certainly needs to be more detailed look.
So I take a pass on that, sorry. Yes, sir.
There's
quick thing. Why did you choose to stop this dynamic change at Main Street and not carry it, for example, to Gulf Shore, which is the highest traffic volume and highest accident level in the city?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really fair question. I think we thought it's a big bite to take, and what does seem to make sense, initially anyway, is to connect the town center, which we're trying to revitalize, and this is only reaching into half of the town center. So your point's a great point. If it works really well and it's well received, we could go further east. I think it may even have to be done in phases if the money is more difficult to, but it's a great point. I mean, if it works, we could extend it east.
The median between the lanes, would you still have left turn lanes, and is narrowing it down to 10 feet kind of too much?
You would not have left turns. You would go to the roundabouts. And now the nice thing about the roundabouts, and by the way, this whole workshop could be about this, so we will have to cut it at some point, but what's good about it is you end up making right turns in and right turns out, which is much easier, more comfortable, and safer.
No left turns.
Yeah. But the left turns you do make on the roundabouts would be a lot easier. There's a gentleman in the back in the black shirt.
Yes, you brought up last night and again tonight, you said that the left turn lanes and stuff like that were illegal, or
they don't meet the current FDOT standards.
Who designed those and who put those in?
The standards change over time, so the standards have gotten stricter because they realize that they're really dangerous, and because of the higher volume of traffic. I mean, trying to make a left turn out there, I haven't figured it out yet. Maybe it's because I don't live here, but I have waited a really long time.
Nobody else has either.
Yes, sir.
I think this is a tremendous idea. I think the problem is you stop at Main Street, and then maybe someday you'll continue to go east, and then all of a sudden you're going to run into Airport Road, where widening is going to happen and narrow back down at Airport Road to come west on 98. If this is going to be done, and if people are going to raise taxes to spend money to do these kinds of things, a master plan of all of it needs to be done, because right now they're going to start widening 98 at Airport Road, and then it's going to die at Airport Road coming west, and you're going to be in the same traffic jam you are, except it's just a little further down the road.
Yeah, I mean, the points, those are great points. You know, if this is a successful solution, it can be extended. Now, there's a lot of heavy lifting to make this happen, and that's kind of what we're focused on right now. Could it be further east? Yes, it could, and we want to make sure we can, you know, see traction that this idea can actually happen. And then I think your point's a great point.
Well, so can I get a show of hands? Does anybody not have a survey? If you do, please raise your hand. Okay, I think everybody's got a survey. I think we need to keep it moving.
Yeah.
So please make sure you filled out that first question on the survey. And actually now we can move to the next question. Do you have the plan? Where? You can go ahead and read the next question on the survey, and that's actually got 4 parts, so it's going to take a minute for you to read through. So we're going to wait here for a minute, let you read those questions. We're not going to steal those surveys from you right now, so if you don't get finished before we're done, that's fine, but I'm just going to kind of sit here and wait till I see eyes coming up that everybody's done with the question number 2.
When do you plan to address Holiday Isle?
We'll be doing that very soon. We've got one more segment, and then we'll be getting to Holiday Isle.
It's time to do that.
You misled us.
We should move on, right?
We got Town Center before we get to Holiday Isle. I want to tell you first is the location of Town Center. If you're not familiar with it, it goes from Beach Drive to Airport Road and along 98, and then Main Street is kind of in the left middle of that. The area that Brian's going to be focusing on tonight is everything in the southern half of that. We've already gotten comments that some people want us to look further north as well, and that certainly there's opportunity to keep talking about this. Brian?
Thank you. So really this wasn't something we had to do, but when we started listening to you, we started thinking about opportunities. We think this is a really big opportunity, so we couldn't help ourselves. We had to do this little sketch in our office. So that's about 200 acres, and as Liza pointed out, to orient you, this is Main Street. This is the first roundabout I talked about earlier. This is the second roundabout. It could certainly extend further. And what I'm going to do is just give you, we did a lot of this in detail, so a lot of you saw this in detail last night, so we're just going to go kind of briefly. It starts out with the idea of a mixed-use retail center here, an open-air center that you could all be proud of, and it might look like this. It might have 2- and 3-story buildings, a lot of diversity, a lot of opportunities for office and retail and other supporting uses. Maybe there's some public uses in there too. The residential would kind of reflect what you told us you wanted to see, which is a lot of diversity in housing, so people have a lot of needs and a lot of different needs, a lot of choices relative to sizes and incomes and rental costs and so on and so forth. That could be reflected in some of these types of buildings. We also want to be able to put some what we call high-density single-family into this area, not a lot of it, but some of it, because our surveys tell us that overwhelmingly people still like single-family detached, and when people are single or downsizing, sometimes they don't need big ones, and we can get pretty high densities, you know, up to 15 units an acre detached, which is interesting. It's a new market thing that we're seeing a lot of interest in. So some of that could happen. Lots of different forms this housing can take. We've got the idea of linking this center with what we call a high street across Main Street, tying into the more easterly part of the project. And that might have this characteristic, very pedestrian friendly and very inviting. And we've got some nice park opportunities. This is very urban, and this is a little more naturalistic. So that's the urban part of it, in the middle of that retail mixed-use center. And some of this landscape could happen on the eastern side. And the charter school, we heard a lot about a school, but we think that if it existed in the, maybe not the near term, but a little later, it might be an urban charter school to be determined. And a major workplace component that might be anchored by medical, could be a hospital expansion, or it could be medical research technology and medical office, because there's a big demand for that type of use these days. And that's that.
So one thing that we want to just note is that that is a generalized vision plan we put together relatively quickly. And this would require a more detailed visioning effort that would engage with specific property owners and think about the phasing of that project. And that's one of the things on our recommended to-do list for the city. And now I gotta switch slides, so we're switching to Holiday Isle.
This is Holiday.
Moving through Destin, or whether they want to slow it down?
So the question was, does the Department of Transportation want traffic to move faster or slow traffic down through Destin? And I can say for a very long time, the Florida Department of Transportation has been focused on moving cars fast. There's been a pretty significant change in the last 10 years, and even more so in the last 3 or 4 years, towards trying to be more aware of local cities' concerns and aware of pedestrian safety, because a lot of times the faster the cars are, the more likely someone is to die, whether they're in a car, bike. Higher speed means more fatalities. So they're looking for places that are urban. So in reference also to the gentleman who talked about the 6-laning, there are parts of the highway they want to go fast, but then as it's going through a downtown, recognizing that it might need to slow down. So if we can shift to, did I leave a pointer? So shifting to Holiday Isle specifically. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go through the slide set, but relatively short slide set for this, and then Lynn's going to lead us through an exercise in the back of the room with the circles to have a more detailed conversation. So looking at Holiday Isle, I'm first going to go through a little bit of background. The first thing I want to talk about is the study area. So I know you say I say Holiday Isle around here, and I get 3 different answers for what that actually is. So what we're looking at for the Holiday Isle planning area is basically when you get onto Gulf Shore Drive, it's everything on your right, and as soon as you make the turn, it's everything on both sides, all the way out to Noriega Point. So that's what we're talking about when we say Holiday Isle planning area for the purposes of this evening. In talking to you last time, we found out that you guys really love Holiday Isle. You think it's a unique jewel within the city, and that it's a great community. We talked about the public beach access that is located at the end of Holiday Isle, and we also talked about that it's really unique in being surrounded by water. In fact, Brian will say this canal system is something that's extraordinarily unique, and basically you can't build these anymore in the state of Florida. We also looked at some of the architecture, and from our perspective, we heard about walling off the beach, and looking at some of these buildings, we understood what you were talking about, because you see these very, very long walls, and this particular building is over 500 feet long. We also, in looking at and traveling around the island, found disparate amounts of pedestrian amenities. In some areas there were really great walkways, and in some areas there was kind of discontinuous pedestrian connectivity. We also heard a lot about these rental vacation homes that were a concern to you because of parking issues, because of noise issues, and because to some extent of garbage related issues. Okay, so that's what we heard. That's a very brief summary of what we showed you last time and what we heard from you last time. So looking towards the future, what we did is we're looking at some of the properties that are still on the island that are undeveloped, which are very few and far between. So we looked at one particular proposed development project. This is actually an active development project that's still on the books with the City of Destin that's been approved. So we're experimenting with it as a theoretical concept, but as long as it's approved, it wouldn't change. So this is a proposed development in HDR, that means high density residential. And this is what that would look like in 3 dimensions. And we understand that the density in this HDR zone is 19.9 units an acre. And when we looked at this building, we were kind of surprised at how big it was for 19.9 units an acre. It seemed like that was a larger building than what we'd expected that density. And so we did an experiment in-house and said, if we use sort of what we've seen as an average size unit, how big would that building be? And as you can see, it's considerably smaller. It's about half the size. And that's a side-by-side comparison. And so basically what's happened is the unit sizes in this building are very, very large. Super luxury units, maybe. And we have nothing against super luxury units, but this is part of what we were talking about with this total FAR concept. We use that concept to evaluate these projects, and so that you wouldn't usually use an FAR to look at a residential project, but if you did, what you'd find is this project is a 2.3 total FAR, and this experiment down here is a 1.0 total FAR. So our recommendation is, we don't want to restrict people to average size units necessarily. If they want to do, we don't want to discourage luxury units, but at the same time, on the other end, we don't want to have no accountability on how large a building is going to be within the zone, just based on units per acre. So what we're recommending is a 1.3 total FAR for this zone, and that gives some level of predictability on how big those buildings are going to be. So in summary, what we're recommending, as in other areas, we're recommending eliminating the tier system. In HDR, that means we're looking at eliminating the tier 3, and we talk generally about the tier 2 as being what we see as the expected property rights within a zone, because if you check the right boxes, you can build that currently. So that means HDR and Holiday Isle we're eliminating tier 3 and throughout the city. Now, Holiday Isle, you never actually could do a tier 3 to begin with because there was already a provision that excluded doing a tier 3 on Holiday Isle, but it's going to now be eliminated citywide. There's only a few parcels that actually applies to. We're also, as I described, suggesting a total FAR of 1.3 to be on that as well. HIMU is another, is really the only other higher intensity zone within Holiday Isle, and we're recommending basically the same principle. So eliminating the tier 3 and instead establishing a 110-foot, 10-story height limit in HIMU. And we haven't developed an appropriate total FAR for that, but we will. And that zone, actually, you could have done a tier 3, and we're recommending that we wouldn't have that option anymore. So the other major issue that we talked about was vacation rental houses, and we did spend some time on this. We are saying it requires additional study. It's a pretty complex topic. So one of the options that we're putting out, and this was also a discussion we had in Crystal Beach, one of the options we're putting out is designating preservation areas, and within those preservation areas, we'd establish certain limits on how large homes could be. Also, in areas where homes continue, the larger homes continue to be permitted, that they would be required to have more parking, they would be required to have more garbage cans, and then there's a whole set of code enforcement issues that aren't really land development issues, so they're not really within our purview, but we forward those comments on to the city, and the city's actually already working on some improvements in code enforcement for that. The other thing that we wanted to mention is that in terms of the vacation rental houses, what we want to be careful of, the red indicates vacant parcels, and this is, what I'm pointing to now is basically the single family area. We need to take a serious look at why those parcels are vacant, and what we wouldn't want to do is impose limits on the size of the homes that then basically ensure those lots stay vacant forever. Because if people don't want to build on them now, the question is why is that? And there could be a number of reasons, but what we don't want to do is we don't want to impose something that basically keeps those parcels vacant forever. So a couple other general recommendations. We want to extend the design guidelines to be universally applicable and limit the length of building facades. So we talked about this in a little more detail in Crystal Beach, but for instance, looking at this building, with design guidelines, even if it was allowed to be that big, we would recommend that it couldn't be that long in a single building. It would have to be 2 200-foot long buildings rather than one 400-foot long building. The other recommendation we're making is a little more attention to pedestrian connectivity, so you don't see what I showed you in that earlier slide where there's these discontinuous sidewalk systems. Something that we didn't spend a lot of time on, but that we want to forward on to the city as a recommendation is reconsidering the design of the entry part of Gulf Shore Drive. It's a 5-lane section. It's with two travel lanes on each side and a single turn lane in the middle. That's generally, we see that kind of section encouraging people to be speeding. And then of course we know it goes down to 2 lanes. And it's also really hard to cross as a pedestrian without putting yourself in danger. So lastly, we've heard a lot of comments about beach access and beach parking, and we forwarded those comments onto the city. they're well outside the scope of our understanding, and there's legal issues that go beyond what we can deal with. But we're certainly aware of those. We heard you, and we are passing those comments on. So this is a summary of the recommendations, and I'm now going to turn it over to Lynn. I know we didn't give her a mic, but she's going to come up here and get one. And by the way, if you haven't finished your survey yet, please do that, and please start to hand those surveys to me, or if you see Monica at the table, make sure we get them before you leave.
Good evening, everyone.
I knew that I drew the short straw when they said, here, you're going to call. And now our group drew the short straw, but we got to go first. So a little sympathies in order here, please. We modified the question. Do you feel that the planning initiatives discussed are generally heading in the positive direction for your area? We modified it to insert the words planning for Holiday Isle. And to that is a definitive and clear and unanimous amongst our group no. That the biggest deficiency in the effort is the lumping together of very disparate elements into the one plan. And then that follows in the three comments that we were in total agreement on. That the plan should segregate the planning between Holiday Isle, that's defined by the association, and the larger area that the group dealt with. They may have been assigned to do that by the city, and that's all well and good, but in their work product, they should have cut out this part and that part and treated them differently, because I can tell you the 2,000 residents out there and owners on Holiday Isle don't think that they're the same as the outside part. Second, everybody agrees on, is that the plan should show that anything inside the Holiday Isle PCNR zone of influence should be governed by the Holiday Isle PCNRs and not the broader guidelines that you offered, the 110, 100 feet and so forth. And again, total agreement that further vetting from the public is desperately, I might add, needed, showing maps where these areas that you're proposing, talking about 100, 110 feet, where they would occur, was what has the potential for it, so we could be better informed. Because right now, we're just throwing some vague numbers on a vague map with lack of definition. And the reality is, when you talk about the specifics, and we didn't get that tonight, we just got a very general glossing over. That's about it.
All right, thank you. Very good. Now, did your group want to go next? Okay, please come up. Hello.
Hi. Okay, so in our group discussion, our whole group, everything that's on our list, all of our group agreed with, so it was 100% agreement on everything that we have on our list. So we brought up, like, their group said that the Holiday Isle PCNR is to the 75-foot height limit, not a 110-foot height limit, and we would like that to be honored. We agree with HIMU, but that there should only be a residential, the height should only be a residential. We agree that the Gulf Shore Drive speed limit situation, they brought up that it allows speeding, and we agree with that. We also said that we would like to limit the length and number of dockage in the harbor. We do think that's a problem that should be addressed through the planning. The vacation rentals, the city's allowing illegal commercial businesses out there in the form of weddings, and that's against the city codes and the Holiday Isle PCNRs, and we would like that to be addressed. We agree with the design guidelines to be universal. That was 100% agreement, and we understand. We agree with the sidewalk connectivity, but the dead-end cul-de-sac roads don't need sidewalks. So the main, so there's like Gulf Shore Drive, and that has sidewalks, and then the side roads to that have sidewalks, but the side roads off the side roads that are the dead-end cul-de-sac should not have sidewalks. We agree.
Certainly, ma'am. This is their group, and it's their opportunity to share with you what they decided. So if you'll honor their word, please.
We agree with putting we suggest that you guys put a bike lane on Gulf Shore Drive, but we don't allow golf carts on sidewalks. That's a problem no golf carts on sidewalks. We would like a 200-foot limit to the facade on the buildings. We agree, the Canin group suggested that, we agree with it. And then we would like better street lights on all of Gulf Shore Drive. But we object to the recommendations that do not follow the PCNRs set by the Holiday Isle Homeowners Association and group.
All right, very good. Good discussion. Okay, your group would like to go next.
This is for the Holiday Isle group of 13 residents. Our rub would be the density. This is not addressed under the current PCNRs of Holiday Isle. Our other rub is the lack of the alignment with the Holiday Isle PCNRs. We're 100% in agreement that the height is 75 feet in our PCNRs, so your plan is not acceptable. We're 100% that 6 stories only is in our PCNRs. And why did Canin ignore this? We're 100% that no 110 feet height, the density is too great. We're 100% why? Because our PCNRs say 6 stories. We're 100% in agreement the road as is fine and it works. We're 100% the pedestrian path is fine with no carts or LSVs. We're 100% for underground wiring.
And when you said your road, you're speaking of Gulf Drive?
Correct.
Okay.
Gulf Shore Drive.
Gulf Shore Drive. Okay.
Shore Drive.
If you'll write that down so we'll make sure we know which road you're speaking of.
On number 2, what we need to do in the areas of our community is number 1, and this is the most important thing that I can say tonight. The needs of this city to address aligning the city zone with the Holiday Isle PCNRs made in 1962 before Destin became a city in 1983. That says it all and it solves it all. Thank you.
Okay, your group will come next, please.
Oh, I guess I got it.
You got the clipboard. Come on down.
Well, we're a pretty agreeable bunch here. We agreed that eliminating the tier system in general is in the right direction, with one dissenting vote, and we perfectly respect his feelings about that, simply because he's the developer that owns it. So, on the Holiday Isle mixed use. So we certainly respect Steve's opinion there. But other than that, everyone, that was the only rub we had on that one item, was we didn't have 100% acceptance of that. We all agree that the pedestrian connectivity, ADA requirements and such, is really something that's important. Some of our members, in fact, one of our members in our group has a son in a wheelchair, so very, very important, and we're going to see more of that as time goes on, I'm sure. Sidewalks and such, we have no real issues with the current setup with sidewalks on the south side of Gulf Shore Drive. We understand the difficulty of putting them in on the north side, but the south side has lots of cracks, crevices, and I know they made an attempt to widen that a few years ago, so there's more space to share. But when you get bicycles and golf carts and people with dogs and people walking and people jogging, it's gotten very, very constrictive over there, even as wide as that sidewalk is today. I think my own personal attitude was we might want to do something like the landscape portion you saw on Highway 98 that would look real nice. We all agree on the reconsideration of the 5-lane Gulf Shore Drive area as it approaches the choke point. There's several of us that live off of Gulf Shore, since Gulf Shore, off of Holiday Isle. Holiday Isle starts right where the sign says "Welcome to Holiday" or "Welcome to Holiday Isle." That's where Holiday Isle really starts. We're considered part of Holiday Isle when we're east of that. But a bunch of us, you know, especially where I am right there at the choke point, it's a treacherous spot. It's unsafe. We've got a crosswalk right there. We have people plowing through the right of way there all the time. So we'd like to see that maybe taken down to 3 lanes like you all suggested. And the last item we have is address the flooding on Gulf Shore Drive on the northbound after the curve headed toward 98, and on the westbound just before you get to Sandpiper Cove's entrance. Those are the 2 worst spots. Very dangerous. Lots of people swerving to miss it. So we'd like to see that somehow addressed.
Thank you very much for coming. And most of you probably know the website, but just a friendly reminder, EnvisionDestin.com is where you can go and see the results of our previous May meeting, as well as soon to come results from this meeting. So, anybody, Ken, do we have any other needs? So we're good?
Good.
Any questions?
I was asked earlier today when the videos will be, these videos for this